if you're looking at deals, this came from one of my mentors. He taught me two great sayings that really, really stuck to me from a business side. He said, if you can't do the numbers on the back of a napkin, well, then it's probably just too complicated because too many things have to go right and there's too many challenges that have to happen. It's too technical if you can't do it on the back of a napkin. And he also told me if everything has to go right for you to have a deal, or if you have to hit a home run for this to work, it's probably not worth it either, right?
What's that saying? Simple scales, complex fails. Welcome into the Dynamis Podcast this week, guys. We have a really cool episode. My newly acquainted friend, Dirk Velde, and I'll explain in a minute how I met Dirk, but Dirk is a very talented ground-up multifamily developer, and he's got a lot of really cool things to share with us about insights and tips on the market, why ground-up development, things to be looking for, and what to be really optimistic about on the horizon. And I just want to welcome Dirk to the studio this week. Dirk, welcome to the Dynamis Podcast.
What's up, my man? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. Of course. Welcome to the show. We're grateful to have you. I think a good starting place here would be to talk about who you are. What are you doing? Who are you? Give the audience some background on who we get to share wisdom with today.
Yeah, so my name is Dirk Velde. I live in Bend, Oregon. We have our own business that focuses in on ground up investing, both in the mid-sized multifamily and then entry level. Those are really the two focuses that we have. We started our business, which is called Momenticized Construction. We have Momenticized Companies is really the overarching thing, and we have both a vertical construction arm and then also a development arm where we come in, we put land deals together, and then when we can, we self-perform or we'll hire a third party. I've got two sons. I'm a huge family guy. It's my biggest why, my biggest driver. Yeah, that's a quick and dirty overview of us.
Yeah, I love it. And so I'll just give everybody some explanation of how I met Dirk. And this is something that I pound on continuously. And it's something that I want every single person listening in the audience to take to heart. You need to be unafraid to go meet people, to network, to tell people what you're doing. Tell people the vision you have. What are you doing? What are you up to? Where are you going? I was on my way back from a weekend mastermind ski trip in Mount Bachelor, Oregon. I was flying home back to Tacoma, Washington, and by a random set of circumstances, I got sat on a plane next to Dirk. And the reason that we started a conversation is because Dirk is a family man. He's got young kids on the plane, and we sparked off a conversation because I was telling him all about my kids, and he was asking me where I was going and what do I do for a living. And I said, hey, have you heard of this group called GoBundance? It's a mastermind full of investors, people who are trying to get to the next level, entrepreneurs, business owners. And he said, hey, have you ever heard of Ryan Pineda? And I was like, yeah, of course. Who hasn't heard of Ryan Pineda? He's like, well, I'm on my way to Vegas right now. We're going to the Wealthy Way conference. And so right there, it sparked off a conversation because obviously we're in the same arena. We're thinking the same way. We're going in the same direction. And the rest of that flight was just sharing ideas and visions and struggles as entrepreneurs, as dads, as, businessmen trying to balance all this. And, it just goes to show you just never know what opportunity is sitting right next to you. And now, here Dirk and I are building a relationship and a friendship, and he's on the podcast, and who knows what can come of this? Who knows if in the future we start doing deals together? And I cannot stress enough, please tell people what you're doing. Have a conversation, provide value. You just never know what kind of fruit you can harvest from that.
Boom.
Boom.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's right. And it was also crazy, right? Is when you do meet somebody, you can connect with them instantly. And I mean, that flight went by just like that, right?
Yeah.
And so it was a really, really special connection. And that power of networking is unbelievable. That's also what I think is so beautiful about social media. I was outside of the social media game for 6-7 years. And then, somebody educated me on the positive side of it and really flipped it for me. And you can see all the connection, all the networking opportunities that present themselves is unbelievable. So,
yeah, I mean, that's a great point. We weren't focusing on social media in our conversation, but the reason that our relationship kept up is through social media. And I think, we're going to get into like the meat and potatoes of multifamily investing, but I want to highlight something. A lot of people, including myself, have had derogatory views of social media, and I get it. It can go too far one way. But I think what we really need to pay attention to is that social media is simply a tool. It's a bunch of zeros and ones in a software system. What you search for, what you look for is what you find. You know, if you're watching puppies all day long, you're going to get more puppies. If you're using social media to better yourself, better your network, better your life, if you're looking for how to improve, that's what you're going to consume all day long. And it can be a massive form of leverage. And, you know, Dirk and I just kept up through social media. I was watching his business and watching his marketing. And I got to say, by the way, Dirk, since you and I met on that plane and you came back from the Wealthy Way conference, I have noticed an incredible turnaround in your social media presence. It looks like night and day different. You have awesome info. You're constantly out on job sites. You're educating us on how to read blueprints. You have the cool new captions. And I wanted to ask you, what inspired that? Did that come from Ryan Pineda's Wealthy Way conference? I know he's huge on social media and marketing.
Yeah, to go back, it was about a year ago. I was at a mastermind called Carrot Camp over in Roseburg, and it was a really small group. What you do is you go and you present different things you're working on, the struggles you're having. I was presenting our projects, what was going on, and somebody there was like, "Hey, are you doing anything on social media?" And I was like, "No, it's like a distraction, right?" I was like, "That's a distraction. I'm not going to do it." Long story short, that planted the seed. And then, yes, going to Ryan Pineda's event, it was one of those eye openers where you can see the power of what happens when you are able to share what you're doing and what you're learning with a lot of people. And when I saw what Ryan was doing, and then I was connected with other people there as well, I really liked it, and it clicked for me. And then I just decided to say, okay, hey, just like anything, right? If you're going to do it, you got to treat it like a business. So you got to be committed, you got to be consistent, and you have to put some real time and capital into it.
It is such powerful leverage in your business, and you need to have reasonable expectations. You know, people just start doing social media and they think, I need 1 million likes and follows tomorrow. That ain't how it works. You're planting seeds in a field that you're not harvesting fruit from for years. But what isn't measured is this like unknown ROI, is this relationship right here. You and I sit next to each other on a plane, keeping in contact through social media, following up, supporting each other's businesses, and boom, who knows what can come of this. All right, back to multifamily, ground up investing. I remember you telling me on the airplane, this is a family business, correct?
Yeah, the story of us, we're not a self-made story. I've had, both direct family and then aunts and uncles. They've all been in the real estate game, both on the development side, the property management side. So I've grown up in the business, and I was able to really learn a lot from both my direct family, my aunts, my uncles. And it gave me a huge leg up as far as the knowledge base around the real estate game goes. And then 2 years ago, we decided to go and start our own thing. And when we did that, our main focus was that mid-sized multifamily. I believe that the U.S. is heading for a renter's nation, and there's a couple different reasons I believe that. We can talk more about it, but I think that wave is just beginning. Therefore, one of the business models that we're going after in the real estate game is to provide really nice new construction to the renter's nation that's coming and building.
So when you say that you focus on mid-size and entry-level multifamily projects, what does that mean? What is the definition of a mid-size and entry-level?
Somewhere between that 50 to 100 unit is really the mid-size multifamily that we're talking about. Anything that goes over 100 starts to become bigger and bigger, more institutional. A lot more capital goes into those projects. So we focus in on that size. We also have 24 units, right? So I would also, it can be all the way down to 9 units, right? 4plexes. That's also that mid-size range. But I guess I would say your tipping point is right at about 100 units. What we do from our business model, at least right now, we build like the 84 unit project that we have. It's nice new construction, really nice finishes, but we don't do any of the additional amenities. So no big pools or, anything that takes a lot of operating capital, because let's say you head into a recession, we believe that people that maybe are paying $200 or $300 more rent to have that pool, well, when times get difficult, they're going to downsize and come back into the nice new construction without the amenities. So that's the model that right now we're building off of. And then on the flip side, we also provide entry-level housing. So there we're talking, stuff that we're in the Central Oregon area selling in the high 2s, low 3s, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,300 square feet. Again, nice new construction, but really entry-level stuff.
Why have you targeted this entry-level stuff and this mid-size multifamily? You mentioned 100 unit plus is kind of like the tipping unit for institutional investors to come in. In your experience, is this kind of the sweet spot? Are you kind of staying out of the radar of these upper level institutions, but also just out of reach of maybe the average investor who's trying to get started? Like, why are you targeting? Obviously, everything you're doing is very calculated, but why is the midsize bringing you the greatest value in returns as you're thinking about developing?
Yeah, I think there's a sweet spot in there. There's a sweet spot for the fact that when you stick to like that midsize from a construction side, we're not doing any like 5-story stuff where you have concrete parking, elevators, a lot of steel, right? So our construction costs they come down. It's not as technical either, right? So we're able to keep our costs in line. That's one factor. And then, yeah, I do think that there is a sweet spot there right now. You're not battling against those institutional guys, exactly like you said, but you're also able to be a little bit above the maybe mom and pop shop that just can't get the capital to make it happen. We'll create positive pivots if we have to, but I see a good like 5 to 10 year run in this space.
Yeah.
Before we have to pivot.
Let's talk about that. You see like a 5 to 10 year run in this space, this being like a targeted asset class that you think is a good vessel to kind of weather the turmoil that we may or may not have ahead. And there's a lot of people that agree and disagree on like what's laying ahead in the economy. But, you mentioned Renters Nation, and I want to know what your thoughts are. Why do you think that we're headed into a Renters Nation? What kind of signs are you looking at? What are you seeing? What's giving you the cause for a pause and concern to say, hey, I think we're going to get ahead of this with this asset class in particular?
I know some people also, they don't like that idea that it's going to become a Renters Nation. There's a couple factors I look at and say, okay, cost of building in general, right? I mean, just the cost of owning a home, the cost of land to build on a home now, the cost of building a home is up, the cost of mortgages are way up, very well. Now they are starting to do some stuff to fight against that, and we'll see what happens. I mean, what are the likelihoods of a 40-year mortgage? Is that going to happen? That'll change these types of predictions, right? If you have a 40-year mortgage, now all of a sudden your monthly cost of owning a home will go down. But I think that those are factors. I also think even just lifestyle decisions, right? So if you look at the baby boomers now, they want less maintenance, less headache, right? I think there's going to be a big pool of baby boomers who will become renters, whether that's in a 55 and plus community, right, where they can be around like-minded people. Now they don't have to deal with the maintenance of their home and everything that comes on the negative side of home ownership. And then you also have the younger generations who aren't as concerned about owning a home. There's still people that want to own the home, but they're not as concerned about it. They want the flexibility and they prioritize experiences. And then I would say the third component of that is if you study countries that have been around a lot longer, go to Europe. They're already renters nations. As time goes on and places become more and more developed, it's a natural progression because the cost of everything goes up, the cost of land, cost of building, so on and so forth. And so if you look at Europe, it's already there. And as the United States ages and becomes more and more developed, that's just a perspective I have.
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of solid points there. There's a lot of valid points there. Baby boomers used to be the largest generation in history. Millennials have since surpassed them. And we have this thing on the horizon that a lot of people are calling the gray wave. And there's a lot of speculation on both sides of what's going to happen as all these baby boomers start to retire. There's a lot of single family investors who are getting a little bit nervous because what if everybody's, exiting the single family space? And, look, the answer is nobody has a crystal ball. Like nobody knows 100% what lays ahead of us. But what we do know is that one of the largest generations in history is retiring every single day, and they're going to need places to live. They're going to need shelter in the future. And I think if we can identify key areas to put this types of shelter, like in, Sunbelt areas, warm places that are close to healthcare facilities. We can really get ahead of looking at, what lies ahead on the horizon, just using metrics and data and putting ourselves in a position of opportunity, not to take advantage, but to help, right? It's like a mutually beneficial relationship. So I think what you're doing is very interesting, and it's also a little bit outside the norm. You mentioned construction costs. The cost of land is increasing. The cost of materials are increasing. How are you factoring that into your business? How are you staying profitable during this time of increased cost and uncertainty?
Yeah, it's one of the most challenging parts of the ground up game. It's really three major components that you have to do a lot of due diligence around, the construction and the budget being one of them. I think that the key there is to, when you're doing your due diligence, you have to really, really make sure you understand what's going on. That's the benefit of being in the industry, being a builder myself. I know the cost of everything. And so when we're doing the underwriting and the pro formas for these projects, we're extremely conservative on what's going on. I always like to run three scenarios, right? Like a pessimistic scenario. Hey, let's say everything goes to crap here and we have massive cost overruns. Pessimistic, worst case, what does that look like? I like to run a realistic scenario, and then I like to run an optimistic scenario of, hey, if if we're under budget, what does it look like? And then it's also really important to build in some safety net with a contingency. And I think that you build your contingency, whatever your contingency is, depends on your experience level, both of whether you're going to self-perform or if you're going to hire another general contractor. You'll build in a contingency, whether that's 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%. That just varies depending on your comfort level with who's building it.
Do you have relationships with these suppliers because you're coming to them so often that you can lock in pricing at different periods in the project to where that what your cost is going to be and it's fixed? You're not getting halfway through the build and all of a sudden you're having to readjust your performance because lumber increased 30%.
You got it spot on. It's all about having really good relationships and then buying out. But it's also lucky, right? Like a lot of it's also timing and luck, right? So we're now seeing, if you were building a year ago, your budget looks a lot different than what you're building today. I mean, lumber's down over 70% from its high, right? So that's really shifting. There's also different ways to protect yourself as far as how you set up your contracts. So there's like on our Redmond apartments, we're doing what's called a guaranteed maximum price, which means that the builder will go in and when they're bidding that out, they're definitely going to inflate each line item, but there's already cushion built into that budget, each line item.
Right.
But it's a guaranteed maximum price, meaning that no matter what happens, that's the price from a developer standpoint. And that's one way to protect yourself. Now, if you were to go and make changes, there's of course change orders that are associated with it, but that's another tactic that you can use. The only problem with that tactic, Tim, is that, if you do go that route, you're going to get inflated numbers, right? Because everyone's going to protect themselves. And so you might end up paying a little bit more for that security.
Yeah. And so that's the trade-off, is you may not get the best possible price that you could have, but you're trading a little bit of price for security. You also know that it cannot exceed a fixed, agreed upon price at the front end of the project before you get into it. And then all of a sudden the numbers are adjusting and you're calling people who are unhappy to hear that they're going to have to pay more.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say another thing is scale equals, purchasing power. So if the more scale you have, the more purchasing power you have.
So how many of these are you looking to do? What is on the horizon for you? What do you got your eyes fixed on? What's the target?
Yeah. My end goal is I want to have over 10,000 units that we have as a company that we've developed and put together. Over 10,000 is what the big picture goal is. And then I'm just taking that step by step. Right now, we've got a 84 unit, we've got a 24 unit, we have a 40 unit that we have to put the infrastructure in on. So we're just taking it step by step. If we begin with the end in mind to hit 10,000 units, and I'm not putting any time horizon on that. Kind of goes back to that social media point you had, right? I think if you're really committed to something and you're passionate about something, the best way to succeed is to not put any time horizon on it. Just keep going until you hit the end goal, and so that is what the end goal is, 10,000 units plus.
I think to an average American listening to an episode like this, and they hear you as an entrepreneur and as a business owner talking about, yeah, I'm going to own 10,000 units. It's an audacious goal. And there may be questions of why so many, why 10,000, you know, why, how did you come up with that number, and why is that what you've targeted and are working towards?
Yeah, comes from a guy I like to follow, which is little Grant Cardone, actually. He always talks about why not 10x your goals. I mean, I used to think of having 100 units was crazy, right? I thought that was a crazy thing to do. So it was originally 1,000. And then from listening to him and reading his book, 10x, that's really what shifted my mind on it, right? Why not set these crazy, huge, audacious goals that when people hear it, they're like, how are you going to do that? That's crazy. What are you talking about? Why not set those, right? I mean, it makes, to me, I'd rather go chase after this huge, crazy, big dream and fall way short or fail on my face than just sit there and, you know, and do nothing. So,
are you familiar with Andy Frisella, the Real AF podcast?
No.
You would like it, I think. It's kind of in line with Grant Cardone mentality-ish, but I was listening to a podcast of his one time, and he's like, your goals should be embarrassing to tell people. You should be terrified to tell people because they're going to laugh at you. Essentially, he's like, screw those people. Because guess what? If you're aiming for the stars and you end up hitting the moon, you're still in the top 0.1% of every other human being on Earth. He's like, everything you think you're doing, 10x it. He's like, screw that, 100x it. I have this affirmation that I stand in the shower when I'm driving my car. I'm always reciting this affirmation to myself. And it used to be like, I'm right on track to $100,000 a month in positive personal cash flow. And now, since listening to that podcast every single day, my affirmation is, I'm right on track to $1 million a month in positive personal cash flow. And you know what? Who knows if that's ever going to happen, but I tell myself it is every single day. So I'm with you on the 10X.
Yeah, baby.
So I want to talk about why ground up construction instead of renovation. You see a lot of investors, they target a property that needs some sweat equity. They can go in, force equity, refinance it, have a capital event, pay their investors back. Why ground up? What's the advantage?
It's easier, Tim. It's easier, in my opinion. I literally believe in my heart that it is easier to do a ground up project than it is a fix and flip. You know, like if you look at my construction skills, I'm a business builder. And by that, I mean like somebody that I hire people to do the work. I don't do the work myself. I'm not very smart actually in the construction world. If we were to go into a remodel and start opening up walls, I wouldn't know what to do. Like I would kind of get nervous and I'd be like, oh, this is a headache, right? Versus ground up is step by step. You do your dig out, you do your foundation, you get it inspected. It's brand new. There's no questions. You follow a plan. I believe it's easier than remodeling. And then the second part of it is that same equity that you're talking about. When you do it right, there's a lot of built-in equity in going ground up. I mean, a lot. I would say double. Typically, you see double what a fix and flip would be, you know. And the third component, there's not as much competition in the ground up game as there is in trying to find a really good fix and flip. I mean, you're going to have like 20 people bidding on the fix and flip, and go look in your local area. I mean, lots typically sit on the market for a long, long time. Brokers don't know how to sell them. People don't know how to unlock it, right? But the blueprint to actually do it is much simpler than people think.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I love ground up construction. To me, it just feels fresh. It feels clean. If I'm a renter, I want to live in something new. I don't want to live in an old apartment that, yeah, the carpet's new and you put in some new backsplash, but it's an old, saggy, sad building and there's 30 years of cigarette smoke wafting in the hallways. And even though there's new paint over it, it's still there, right? And so I like ground up. But if I was to play devil's advocate, and if we're being fiscally conservative and we're looking ahead at the debt markets, the volatility ahead, I'm thinking, okay, well, here's a risk in construction. I go out and I buy a piece of land, however I fund that land. And then I go through all the development costs. I'm going to go do my geological survey, all my stuff, my phase ones. Maybe you have to rezone. There's all these costs associated with it. So maybe it's a 12-month to 24-month development period before you break ground and start construction. What the heck is debt going to look like? If I'm collecting investors, 2 years before or 12 months before we start construction, and I'm thinking I'm going to get X amount of return, I'm really betting on an unknown debt market ahead. And looking at the economy and the uncertainty and how much interest rates have increased recently, that's a big question mark for me when I'm considering where to place my capital. And I'm debating on going with, a syndication that's going to renovate an existing complex versus ground up development. We're planning on a capital event from a developer maybe 3 to 5 years from now. And that's kind of a long ways out to guess what the debt market's going to look like.
It's a great point, because it is the one negative side of the ground up is you do have to have the waiting game for permits, land approvals, etc. And on that up to the second biggest risk of ground up is, what does your future debt look like, right? So the two things I would say on that, when you go, let's say you buy a raw piece of land, take the 84 unit piece as an example. The nice thing is, if you do it right, what you can do is, in your contracts on these larger land developments, you don't actually ever close on the land until you have your approvals in place, your entitlements in place. And what's so great about that is, once you have entitlements, meaning the city says, yes, you can build 84 units here, as long as you meet this condition, this condition, this condition, this condition, the value of that land, that raw land that you just tied up, there's so much value you create there by getting entitlements. It's insane. You can sometimes even double the value of the land before you ever even close on it. That's what happened with Redmond. Before we ever even closed on the land, we had doubled it. The other component to that, and I think one of the big risks where people are going to get in trouble is, like, rule number one in land development: don't ever put debt on raw land, right? So you have to be able to buy that land in cash, because you don't know how long the permits are going to take. You don't know what you're going to run into, right? And if you're paying every month for a piece of land out of your pocket, the carrying cost on that can eat you. They can eat you alive. And, that's where people get in trouble. So rule number one is, you cannot put debt on raw land, because you just don't know what that shakes out to be. And then the third thing I'll say, which again we did at Redmond Apartments to protect ourselves against the future risk of debt, if you work with a small local bank, one of the key things that you can do there, and you pay for it, you have to pay a little bit for it, but we locked in our entire loan. So the entire 11 and a half years, 18 months of construction plus, the 10-year loan, we locked that in at the very beginning just for the certainty, right? We wanted to make sure that we had certainty in what was happening. So it goes back to underwriting. We underwrote that deal at 6% interest. We locked it in at 5.35. So we're protected. I mean, we're literally already performing under what we were shooting for. So I think that yes, it's a huge risk, but there's ways to mitigate it by doing your due diligence and never putting debt on raw land, baby.
That's actually a really interesting point. Debt. You fixed your debt. How long is that debt fixed for? Because I'm telling you, there's a lot of people that are about to get spanked really bad and really publicly because they have a lot of short-term adjusting debt, bridge debt. A lot of syndicators that got into the game have never been through a market cycle. Everybody's making money. The market's going up and up and up and up, and everybody thinks, hey, I could go in, put a crappy deal together, don't need any experience, and it's going to make money. And we're looking at a forecast of people entering into a season of default because they're about to get spanked on interest rate adjustments that are coming due. So when you say that you're fixing the debt, how long are you fixing this debt for?
On that one, it's 11 and a half years.
Yeah, that's incredible. In 11 and a half years, it's more than likely ample enough time to figure out a couple different exit strategies if the market started to shift. Now, nobody knows for sure, but yeah, the longer time horizon you can get on fixing that debt, the more likely you are to be successful. I want to talk about the debt on the raw land. First, before we get there, you said that you don't have to close on raw land until you get the entitlements, correct?
If it's all how you write the contract.
Right,
up,
right.
So it's all how you can negotiate. That's how we do it. And the little carrot I'll give everybody, how to do that with a seller, especially when you're doing a larger project, is you say, hey, I'm going to put like 50 grand or 100 grand into the due diligence to get these approvals. And you just write a simple little clause. If for some reason we pull out, you have the rights to all of this work. So that way it protects the seller as well, right? Because they literally get the rights to all the work that you've done. If for some reason you can't close on it, then it's not been a waste for them. They get the benefit of the entitled land, and it actually ends up being a win-win without having to put the capital in. So that's just a little way that we do it. And the reason why you don't close on it before then, and any sophisticated seller will understand this, is because if you don't have approval that you can actually do what you want to do, then the land's worth what? Nothing. Imaginary. It's all about how you negotiate the contract. That's what I mean by that.
Which also comes down to relationships, relationship building. Like, what kind of relationship do you have with the seller? And I just want to make sure that everybody listening understands some of the terms that we're talking about here. If you're a person who is looking to get into developing or wants to invest with a seasoned developer like Dirk, because you said you could close on a piece of land and you've doubled the value from entitlements. Let's just give a breakdown for the listeners of what does that mean? What are entitlements? And why would the land value be so impacted by getting entitlements on this land?
Yeah, so the entitlements mean that whatever municipality that you're in, they'll have a code, right? Depending on what zone you're in, they have a building code and a land use code that dictate what can be built where. They do these comprehensive plans. They're called 20-year comprehensive plans, and they have different zoning. And then what you do to get entitlements is you do what's called a land use application, stating that, hey, we meet all of this code that's written by the city. Anyone can read it. It's essentially the rules to the game as far as land up development go. You go through and you say, hey, we meet the parking requirements. We meet the zoning requirements. We meet the height requirements, the landscaping requirements, the density requirements. You go through and submit a 30% plan to them, which is really a site plan with some elevations that follows their code. And then they come through and they write you back an application. You do some back and forth and they say, yep, Dirk, this is approved. This meets all of the city code that we have for this zoning, and you are now approved to submit for the building permit side of building this. So they now say, hey, yeah, the city agrees that this conforms with our rules. And now this piece of land actually has the entitlements, the ability to go and build the building that you want.
And this is what makes it more valuable. Now this raw land is ready to go. It's ready to be monetized. And this is how you can negotiate it into the contract, because, a seller is more willing to do business with you to let you hold this debt without making payments until you're ready to close. Because if you default, you're handing them back a piece of land that is now more valuable than it was with them just sitting on it, correct?
Exactly, 100%. Yeah. And a little just cheat code formula for anybody, just like in a fix and flip or anything like that, everybody builds stuff off ARV, after repair value. So your ARV of a new build would just be once you're built, right? Like your final product. So what you can do for land, and if you wanted to say, okay, hey, I know that I can pull comps, and for a single family, when I'm done with this house, it's going to be worth $200,000, right? When it's all said and done. Well, then you could pay up to 20%. The formula is you could pay up to 20% for that land, or if I can do math, $20,000, right? That's like the formula that you can use there. 20% of the ARV is what you would pay for land. When you go into multifamily, you think of everything on a per unit basis. Using the same example, let's say every unit was going to be at the ARV was going to be $200,000. And you ask me, how do you find that? Well, that's just like you would find sales comps from, you look at what was recently sold. You talk to brokers, you go on LoopNet, you go on Zillow, you look at what stuff was recently sold for, and you'll get a per unit for apartments. Now, when you're doing that calculation for raw land, let's say a piece of land was able to produce for you 4 units, each one was at 200,000. The ARV would be 800,000. Well, now I'm trying to pay for raw land. I'm trying to pay 10% per unit on that. And what happens once you entitle, so if I can tie it up for 10% per unit, and then once I entitle it, it's worth 20% per unit, boom, that's how you've doubled the value of it. So you're trying to go and say, I know that ARV is 20%, so now my offer is going to be in that 10 to 15%. And the difference between the two is the money you made. I hope that makes sense.
I think that's super helpful, especially when people are looking at these deals or analyzing these deals or thinking about developing themselves. Like, that's incredibly, incredibly helpful. You know, these are big projects. This takes some capital and it takes some runway. So how are you funding these deals?
I'm very, very lucky and very blessed. I'm tied into the network because my family's been in the real estate game. For right now, it's really like friends and family, really tight-knit friends and family, which does give me a huge leg up. I mean, a massive leg up.
I think the hardest people, the most nerve-wracking people to raise money from are friends and family because you have a personal relationship with them. It's forever. Please do not minimize how you're funding this because oftentimes that's more difficult than just going out and crowdsourcing it. So good for you. This takes a lot of doing. And a lot of people, I feel like, would get paralyzed in the fear of the scale, of the enormity of what you're trying to accomplish. There's a lot riding on your success, on your shoulders, in figuring this out, entering into uncertain market cycles. And you told me a story, and I'm hoping that you can tell the audience about unlocking your potential, the mindset that you carry into these types of projects and where it came from. And you told me a snippet of a story about you running a 100-mile race. And I'm hoping that you can share that with the audience and tie it into how you're able to walk confidently into these types of projects, realizing your potential.
If anybody wants to go and figure out what they're really made of, go and put yourself in a situation like a 100-miler. It doesn't have to be a 100-miler. 100-miler is a good avenue to do it. But go and put yourself in a situation that forces you to literally go past any capabilities that you could ever imagine. On the 100-miler specifically, there's a guy, David Goggins, who, if you haven't heard of him and you're into mindset and you're into fitness and you're just into your potential in general, he wrote a great book. I think it's called Can't Hurt Me. And it's a really good book. It's pretty like rah, but it's a good book. He talks about the 40% rule, which says that they've done a ton of research. And the way it works is a lot of us are operating at truly only about 40% of our true potential, because what happens in our brain is literally when so much pain hits us, like when a certain amount of pain hits us, we're wired to literally retract because, I mean, that's just innately how we survive, right? And so people think that they've hit their limit when really truly they're not even close. They're only at 40% of their true potential. When I first started the 100-mile journey, I hadn't really run more than 3 miles. I was a soccer player who chased after a ball. I didn't really think about like running long distances. Running a marathon was even like, that seems crazy. In a period of about a year, got really into the running game, really into seeing what my true potential was. And we did that 100-miler. And why that was so such a perspective change for me, it literally was a huge perspective change. It was a paradigm shift is the best way to explain it. A paradigm shift literally was because it exposed me to the other 60% that was already inside of me that I had no idea was there. I'm talking personalities. I'm talking like ability to deal with your mental pain, every excuse, every reason to quit, everything you could possibly think about that you want to stop is going through your mind. And what I learned is all you have to do is those are all just thoughts. All those things are thoughts. They don't become real until you let them become real, right? So you can either let them pass by or you can actualize them. And when you run a 100-miler like that and you get exposed to the other 60% of what you're actually capable of, it is a insane journey where your conscious and unconscious come together. When I finished that, I started auditing myself, like, where else am I cutting myself short, right? Like, pretty much when I looked at it, pretty much everywhere. because anytime I felt a little pain, I'm like, oh, that's my capacity. That's what I would say. Oh, I hit my capacity. I'm at burnout. I'm at blah, blah, blah. Excuse, excuse, excuse. When the truth is there's this 60% that's there, and that's the beast that's inside of you. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, this is such a great point. And not a lot of people have ever met that side of themselves before. It's unique and rare. It takes a massive event to meet that side of yourself. But when you do an extremely challenging event like that, it unlocks something in you for the duration of your lifetime. It changes you. I had a unique opportunity to meet that side of myself in the military. You know, a lot of people know I talk about being a member of a special operations unit back in the day. And people in a special operations unit are incredible, but they're not Superman, right? They're not the most jacked. They're not the most intelligent. They are upper echelon. But what makes them so incredibly powerful is just the sheer will to endure and to survive and to win. And I remember meeting myself, and I'll keep this story short. I want to keep it focused on you. But I remember meeting that side of myself one day where I was done. Like every alarm bell in my head was ringing. Everything was going off. I wanted to quit. It was miserable. I was freezing. I was starving. I hadn't slept in days. And I thought to myself, like, enough is enough. And I'm done. I'm done. And I remember I like mentally quit. It was one of the first times in my life I just was like, I'm over it. It's over. Like, it's over. And so I quit, but there was nowhere for me to quit to. I was like in the middle of nowhere, right? On a movement. And so if I quit, like, I would have had to keep going anyways. There was no option. So in my brain, I was like, that's it. I've had enough. I quit. And I was like, well, I'll quit tomorrow. I don't want them to treat me differently today. So I'll quit tomorrow. Well, this thing happened to myself where I still had to endure, and I thought I was done, but yet one foot kept going in front of the other, in front of the other, in front of the other. And tomorrow came, and the next day, and the next day. And I had this epiphany of like, holy shit, my brain is lying to me. It's totally lying to me. I have like way more potential. I have way more left in the tank. And then I started asking myself, how often is my brain lying to me? And then I started like having these arguments with myself, like, shut up. Like, you're not in control. I'm in control, right? I'm in the driver's seat, you know, like, shut up. You're lying to me. And, yeah, it's just a really unique experience. Like, when you unlock that, when you have that epiphany and you unlock that potential, it's life-changing. It's life-changing. You can go do whatever you want to do after that point.
That is a badass story, dude. Literally, yeah. That is a perfect way to sum it up.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it was terrible. It was like in the Appalachian Mountains in Dahlonega, Georgia. It was just absolutely miserable. But anyways, you told me another cool story about your multifamily, something like, you know, just a win, an epic win about the journey you're on. And you mentioned that you used a small amount of money to get into a multi-million-dollar project. And I'd love to just tell that story to the audience.
Yeah. I mean, it was, that part was a little bit crazy, and, you know, it goes back to network and you know, but the first deal we did, that big 84 unit deal, we used $12,300 down. You know, it was on a purchase price of $1.2 million for the land, and we used $12,300 to get it tied up. You know, it was a pretty crazy situation, pretty crazy journey. I think the lesson there, right, is don't close your mind to big things. You know, just if you don't have the capital, I don't have $1.2 million, right? I did not have $1.2 million at the time. I had about $12,300 to put down, right? We were doing other specs and doing other things. The lesson is don't close your mind. You never know what you can get when you ask. And it's also one of those, like, kind of just fake it till you make it situations, right? Yeah. So it was, I felt really, really blessed. Now, I will say to that as well, again, there's one factor to that. I have a family reputation that I can lean on, right? So that helps with those types of things. But even so, like, you don't know what you're going to get. You just need to ask, right? Even if it seems crazy in your own head, ask, tie it up, fake it till you make it, and boom, you never know what'll happen.
I think there is leverage with a family name, but also do not discount you and your work ethic and your drive and your mentality and your character, because the bottom line is I could care less about a family name. I care about the operator that I'm giving the opportunity to. And so celebrate your wins, celebrate who you are, because the truth is that nobody would give you any opportunity or cash or belief if you were a piece of crap. And regardless of your family's reputation in the area, in, you know, your region that you're in the industry you're in, you are doing something that they're not doing anymore. You're stepping forward. You are now the trailblazer, and that carries a lot of weight, and people wouldn't invest in you if they didn't believe in you. And it's obviously clear that people believe in you, and you should believe in yourself too. So don't undermine what you're doing. I think it's really important for you to realize that as you continue to trailblaze ahead.
Thanks for saying that. I appreciate that, Tim.
Well, I was going to ask you a couple more questions about rents and how are you getting your capital out of these types of deals?
Yeah, let's hit it, because that's the other third big question mark, right? Is in the ground up, and just since we're closing it out, we'll sort of review in the ground up game. The three biggest risks are, what are your construction costs? So we have to make sure that we're able to do our due diligence and either have an expert partner. You know, if you're performing it yourself, you just need to make sure, like, do your due diligence on your construction costs. Make sure you're protected in your budget, right? That's risk number one. Risk number two is, what is your fixed debt? When you're done with that project, what does your permanent debt actually look like? Because that's, like Tim said, you know, that's what's going to kill people. And it's also, when you look at another wave that's going to happen in opportunity, there's some really good assets that had some cheap debt that are going to mature. And guess what? At the new rates, they're just not going to work. Or the owner has two chances. They can't refinance. So guess where they're going to go? Back to the bank. The bank doesn't want anything to do with them. And that's where some additional opportunity will come. But risk two is debt. Partner with small banks and figure out ways to mitigate that risk by getting certainty, right? And then the third risk is, what are your future rents? Because at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. A pro forma is, how good are you at guessing what the future looks like? And there's so many factors you can't control, rent being one of them. And that goes back to, run a pessimistic scenario. Hey, if everything's melting down and we're at 50% occupancy or 25% occupancy at like way below market, can we sustain this as a group, as a partnership? Can we make our mortgage payments? What does that look like? If you can stress test that thing and still be okay, like you're not profiting anymore, okay, but you can still be okay and make your mortgage, okay, then that's pretty good, because in the worst case, I can still pay my mortgage, right? And then run your scenario at realistic. What do I think this is realistically going to be? And when you're presenting this, if you're going to go get money from other people, on your realistic scenario, be pessimistic too. Under promise, over perform, right? Like, if you look at what I ran our numbers at, and in August, we'll know, like on my first large project, we're under budget, we're on time, we have fixed debt that's under what we pro forma, but now it's, what's rent going to be? Will rent actually hit what I told everyone it's going to hit or not? And we'll see in August. We'll know, Tim, if that happened. And there's a bunch of different factors that you can look at from a rent side. The only thing that I think is a benefit on rent versus for sale stuff is rent's a little more sticky than your 6-month sale comps. So we are going to see flattening, but I do think it's a little more sticky. So it's a little more stable. You know, you're not going to see like huge swings where all of a sudden you have like a 40% reduction in rent.
We're not going to see the run up for sure. And I think a lot of people that are looking at the multifamily horizon right now, they're nervous about rents. And the reason that they're nervous about rents is because we're looking at a current environment of rents starting to soften. And we know we have a deficit of supply in the marketplace. You know, I think there's like an estimate of we have like a 3 million, you know, household formation deficit in the market. And I think next year there's housing starts for about 1.7 million starts. And of those 1.7, 900,000 are supposed to be dedicated towards multifamily. And why that matters is we need shelter inflation to come down. Right now we have, you know, the cost of rent, the cost of shelter is really high. And if we can put units like that into the marketplace and make shelter inflation come down, we can kind of get a handle on runaway inflation. We can kind of get the market to hopefully settle down. But ultimately, nobody knows. And I think what you just said is far more important than, you know, every single model that's possible, you're planning for worst case scenarios. What if we're at 50% occupancy? What if we're way under? We know that rents are going to stagnate. We're not going to go up every single year, 5%, 6%, even 3%. We may reach a couple years, a 3-year horizon where rents stay flat, maybe up to 5 years. And are we prepared for that? Can we withstand? How long can we hold on before we have to get our capital back out of this deal? And it's more important to stress test and plan for the worst case scenario than try to predict exactly the scenario that's going to happen, because the truth is nobody knows. Nobody knows. So what is your risk tolerance? And are you working with somebody who is planning for worst case scenario and protecting you and your best interest? The Fed is really hell-bent on a job loss recession. They keep saying it over and over and over. They want to keep raising rates until we face a job loss recession, which means people are losing their jobs. And when they lose their job, they have less discretionary income. And guess what they can't pay for when they have no job? Rent. I think that has a lot of investors worried, and rightfully so. You should be prudent, especially if you're handling other people's money. But we're in a window here. We're in a window of opportunity. Market cycles like this come around every so often. And there's usually two camps of people. There's people who sit in fear and do nothing. And there's people who calculate their risk and they move forward, not ignorant of the risk, but they've measured it, they've calculated it, and they've pushed through the breach of that fear to continue forward. And I think that the winners always persevere. They always push ahead. They always find a way. And when everybody else is scared and doing nothing, the winners are the ones that are finding a solution and moving forward. And that's exactly what you're doing. And it's really, really fun to just watch you and your company grow.
Appreciate that a lot, Tim. You summed it up perfectly there. It's either you sit back and do nothing, and then guess what? You get nothing. Literally, you do nothing, you get nothing. Or you look at the risks, you do your due diligence, and you take them. I mean, you are taking risk. That is the game. But without any risk, there is no reward. I would say one other thing is, like, if you're looking at deals, and this came from one of my mentors, he taught me two great sayings that really, really stuck to me from a business side. He's taught me a lot more. But he said, if you can't do the numbers on the back of a napkin, it's probably too complicated.
Yeah.
Right? Meaning if you can't run the numbers and say, hey, I can talk about this, do it on the back of a napkin, well, then it's probably just too complicated, because too many things have to go right, and there's too many challenges that have to happen, right? It's too technical if you can't do it on the back of a napkin. And he also told me, if everything has to go right for you to have a deal, right, or if you have to hit a home run for this to work, it's probably not worth it either, right? Again, like, those two things, they go in conjunction, but they really hit home to me, right? If I have to hit a home run for this deal to work, and I'm like really trying to, in my pro forma, make it work because I want the deal so bad, it's probably not the right deal, right? It's, you know, so it's hard, because it's hard to be patient. For me, the hardest part is to be patient, because I just want to go, I want to create. And, it's really hard as a young entrepreneur. I know you have this too, to be patient as well. It's like, I just want it to happen already. So taking those two quotes really, really simplify things. If you can't do it on the back of a napkin, probably not the right deal. And if you have to hit a home run, it's probably not worth it.
What's that saying? Simple scales, complex fails, right? And the people that are really successful in the latter years of life, even in the middle years of life, there are people that are just doing the boring fundamentals day in and day out, right? We're not talking tech companies that go to the moon on, a crazy whim. We're talking prudent business owners, entrepreneurs who know what they're talking about, know what the risks are taking calculated risks and moving ahead, sticking to the fundamentals day in and day out. And that's what makes the difference. Before we get out of here, I want to give you a chance to tell the audience how we can get in touch with you, how to get a hold of you. But before I turn it over to you for the final time, I just want to remind everybody, if you're getting value out of this podcast, if this is making an impact on your life, if you're learning, please like, subscribe, share this podcast, give us a review, give us a rating, tell your friends about us. We are here to start a movement. We are here to change the world. The goal of this podcast is to give you, the listener, the power of your life back. We are trying to give you tools and tips and tricks and action steps to take charge of your life and change forever the trajectory and the outcome of all the future generations coming behind you. It is your obligation to get up and change your life and build a better one for your family and your friends. And if you're getting anything out of this, please like, subscribe, and share. And with that, Dirk, how can we get a hold of you?
First, I just got goosebumps, man. That was so good. Everybody needs to do that. You can find me at the Dirk Vandervelde. So it's just the Dirk Vandervelde. And we're on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, the whole shebang. We're really focused on just sharing with people our journey and what we know on the ground up construction side. Please reach out. We'll send you anything. It's a complete open book, but we're at the Dirk Vandervelde across all platforms, and we would love to connect with you.
And I'll put Dirk's information in the show notes, his clickable links. You can find that down below. And with that, Dynamis World, we will catch you next week.